Good evening, everyone. My name is Chin, and I will be your host for tonight. On behalf of the JPO family, we'd like to extend a warm welcome to everyone tuning in for tonight's broadcast. We hope that everyone is doing well and staying safe indoors. A friendly reminder to maintain good hygiene at all times and maintain social distancing when heading out. As we like to continue improving your experience with us, please help us achieve this by completing the poll that will be published during the broadcast. If you have any questions, please feel free to type them in the Q&A section down below. To anyone who is interested in sharing tonight's broadcast, a live feed will be shared on the JPO Facebook page, and a recording of the webinar will also be uploaded on the page. Tonight's seminar features Ms. Rita Porfiris, with her topic being the different ways to be a musician in today's world. As our JPO family attendees are mostly students ranging from primary school to college, their parents and their teachers, the sharing of knowledge and advice you have for all of us is invaluable and greatly appreciated. Now on to Ms. Rita's biography. Violist Rita Porfiris has performed in major concert halls across the globe as a chamber musician, orchestral musician, and soloist. Currently professor of viola and chair of chamber music at the Hart School, she has also been on faculty at New York University, University of Houston Moore's School of Music, Florida International University, and the Harlem School for the Arts in New York. She has given masterclasses, lectures, and clinics worldwide. Ms. Porfiris is a member of the Miller-Porfiris Duo and Quartet S. She received Austria's Prix Mercure, was a prize winner in the Fischoff Chamber Music Competition and the Primrose International Viola Competition, and a laureate of the Paolo Borciani International Quartet Competition. In her previous career as an orchestral musician, 15 years of which were spent with the Houston Symphony, she worked under some of the most recognized conductors of 20th to 21st centuries, like Leonard Bernstein, Sergio Celibidache, Kurt Masur, Michael Tilson Thomas, and Christoph Eschenbach. Ms. Porfiris received her BM and MM in viola performance from the Juilliard School, studying with William Linser. Other teachers and mentors included Paul Doctor, Norbert Brainin, and Harvey Shapiro. Now let us welcome Ms. Porfiris. Hi Rita, are you there?
Yes. Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you? Thanks for having me today.
Yes, I'm good too. Okay, could you tell us the video that we just watched from the beginning?
Sure. Well, I wanted to give a little bit of sample of all the stuff I've been doing. And what's interesting about the stuff I showed you is that it was all recorded and created during the pandemic. So you might notice that except for one place, most of the places look the same because they were my downstairs area where we do recording and broadcasting in my house. So it was kind of interesting because, I think what we'll talk about a lot today is how you can still be a musician during the pandemic.
Yeah. Okay, so can you give a brief overview of your background and training?
Yes. So I have had quite a very traditional training. I started as a Suzuki violin student when I was 5 years old. And I forgot what concerto it was, but I was, somewhat advanced. That picture actually is me with Dvorak's viola in Prague. I love that picture. Anyway, so I got to be somewhat advanced. And by the age of 8, I was playing concertos. But then my family moved to Arizona where they had orchestra programs, and I'd never been in an orchestra before. So, of course, I went off to audition for the orchestra program. And it was interesting because I couldn't read music at all because I was a Suzuki student. So they thought, wow, here's this kid that can play concertos. And then they put a piece of music in front of me, and I had no idea what to do. So basically, I had to start over. And I started in the beginning orchestra, which was quite an experience, with people who couldn't play at all. But what was good was, I think about a couple of months into that, all of a sudden, I think my brain started making the connections between the notes and what I was seeing on the page and what I was playing. So all of a sudden I could like it literally happened one day. I could all of a sudden read music. Everything made sense. And ever since then, I've been a pretty good sight reader. But
Wow.
I continued playing violin until I was 13 and I was beginning high school in America. And at that point, I think it was, I was a teenager and all my friends were playing viola. So it was kind of peer pressure. I did it because all my friends were doing it, switching to the viola. So and I also enjoyed playing in string quartets. I enjoyed playing the inner line, not the melody. Actually, I enjoy the rhythm. I enjoy playing the harmonies more. So I decided to start playing viola at the same time as playing violin. And by the time I was ready for college, I decided that I wanted to only play viola. So I auditioned for, a bunch of music schools and got into Juilliard in New York, where I got my undergraduate and my graduate degree studying with Mr. Linzer, who was retired, but he had been the principal violist under the NBC orchestra with Toscanini, which is that's really old, right? That's a long time ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he had been principal violist there, and then he was principal violist in the New York Philharmonic. So he was quite a teacher and quite a historical figure, actually. And by the time he started teaching me, it was actually his 80th birthday, the year I started with him. But I
Wow.
got so much out of, yeah, it was amazing. And I got so much out of studying with him. He was such a wonderful man and such an amazing musician. And it still stays with me now. But aside from studying with him, of course, at Juilliard, you have a lot of opportunities. And I got to study with other teachers for chamber music. I did summer festivals. I studied in the the Salzburg Mozarteum
Mhm.
school and various other places over the summer. So I've had some training in Germany, a lot of training in Germany as well.
Wow.
So I'm lucky that I have both that American and European background.
Wow. That's very nice.
Yeah.
Okay, so would you like to talk about your early career with the orchestra and string quartet?
Yeah. So, when you go to music school in America, at least when I did a long time ago, they everybody thinks they're going to be a soloist, but as a viola player, well, you don't really have that many solos, so that's not really our thing. So Mr. Linzer, my teacher, always made sure that we were very well trained in playing an orchestra and playing orchestra excerpts. We went to orchestra excerpt class every week, and we had mock auditions and all those things. So of course I started taking auditions right away when I was still in school. And the very first orchestra audition I took, and this is kind of funny, was for the Met Orchestra, which is the best paying job in the United States.
Oh.
I aimed high. And then the second audition I took was for the New York Philharmonic. So it was kind of funny, kind of just taking all those auditions as a Juilliard student. But I took a bunch of auditions. I started getting places in those auditions. And I eventually started working in Germany more. I got a position playing substitute with the radio orchestra in Berlin, which is now it's called the Deutsche Symphoniker, I think. It changed names when the wall came down, but the wall was still up at that point, the Berlin Wall. And I also played with the Berlin Baroque Orchestra. And while I was doing that, I would fly back to the US to take auditions. Eventually, I got sick of all the traveling, and I took a position in America's Training Orchestra, which is the new World Symphony, which is run by Michael Tilson Thomas. It still
Mhm.
exists. It's a great organization. And that, it's young people who are allowed to be in this academy for 3 years, and they get really amazing training. They get to work with all these really top conductors. They get to have master classes with the top artists. So I did that for 2 years. And while I was there, I formed a string quartet because, it's not enough to play an orchestra for me. So
Yeah.
I formed a string quartet. And we did competitions worldwide and we won some and we got to tour around. And we were very lucky because the New World Symphony supported us. And so they would use us as kind of their, fundraiser and kind of like the group that they would show if they wanted to show the world like what some of their students were doing. So we got to tour and we got to play for the Prince of Monaco and we got to play for Queen Isabella of Spain. And it was quite an exciting time in my life. And, the quartet applied for a bunch of jobs and we were about to get a residency from Chamber Music America. And it was in a state, I'm not going to mention the state, but it was in a state in the United States that really isn't that enlightened, and not many people wanted to live there. So we
Mhm.
all agreed to take one last orchestra audition. And that was when I took the audition for the Houston Symphony, and I won the Houston Symphony. And at the time, Christoph Eschenbach was the conductor. So I felt like I had to take that job. So I actually left the quartet to join the Houston Symphony when I was 24. Yeah, I was
So,
pretty young.
I'm just curious. So, how long was that period of time before you settled down with the Houston Symphony?
It seems like I did a lot, but it was only, between the time when I graduated, I think it was only 3 years.
Mm,
Yeah.
wow.
I was working in Germany and I was doing this other orchestra and a quartet. And I think when you're young, time seems like it's more, it stretches.
Yeah.
There's more time to do things somehow. Yeah.
Yeah.
But that was only
Wow.
3 years. Yeah. Where I did all those things. It was a lot of things that happened. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So, when did you start teaching?
So I've always been interested in teaching. I think my mother was a teacher, and maybe that was in my blood somehow, or maybe I just like being bossy and telling people what to do. But I started teaching Suzuki violin actually at the Harlem School for the Arts in New York when I was 19. So I was still at Juilliard, and it was something I did to make a little money also, but to get experience. And I did that for a few years. And then when I graduated from Juilliard and I was traveling in Germany, I didn't teach much. But when I went to Florida for the New World Symphony and joined the quartet got a residency at Florida International University. So we taught there for a while. So I was in my early 20s, and it was kind of interesting to have students that were older than me. Some of my graduate students were older than me. So you know, that was my first university teaching experience. And then after that, I taught, once I moved to Houston, I taught at the University of Houston. I taught for a year at Rice for a friend who was having a baby. And then, I continued at those two places for a while, and then finally got my job at Hart, which is part of the University of Hartford.
Mm, I see. I heard from somewhere that you also have been to PMF too. So,
Right.
when were you there, and can you share about your experience in the PMF?
When was I there? That must have been 92, either 92. Let's see, when did I graduate? Yes, it was it was 1992. And that was when I went as a student, and I loved it. I mean, I'd never been to Japan before. Actually, it was my first time to Asia at all, even though actually I'm
Ah,
half Chinese. I don't know if you knew that, but I'm half Chinese.
I see.
So, but my mother was born in China, but I was born in America. So I'd never been to Asia. So that was really great to go there. It was a little bit of a culture shock for someone who was used to Western culture,
Oh
but I really
yeah.
enjoyed it. Yeah. And I remember there was an earthquake there the year I was there. So it was also my first earthquake as well. And it was interesting because Bernstein and Tilson Thomas, I think, had started that festival,
Mm,
but Bernstein had passed away at that point. So maybe it was 93. And Tilson Thomas was there. And that's when I met him for the first time. And it's
mm,
because of that experience that then I decided to go to his orchestra, the New World Symphony.
I
So it is
see.
kind of because of PMF that I went to New World and then got the quartet and did all these other things. So yeah, I guess I have a lot to owe to PMF. And then the other interesting thing is I went back as a professional to PMF in 1996 with the Houston Symphony. I think we were the orchestra in residence. So we went back and we did teaching and we did concerts there as professionals.
Wow.
And then I
Nice.
think there was also a reunion concert, and I feel like I did that too. Is that right? Can someone answer that? Anyway, I think that happened too. I feel like I've been to PMF 3 times in some form. Yeah.
Okay, so why is teaching music so important?
It's really funny because in America, school costs so much money. Um, and even if you get a scholarship, it's still a lot of money. In other countries, it's not quite as expensive.
Yeah.
But so it's hard. It was always hard for me to kind of think in my mind, well, everybody knows, it's really hard to get a good paying job as a musician. So why should I teach music and kind of make people be poor for the rest of their life. They should be doctors or lawyers or something. But you know what? The truth is the opportunities that music can give to any student, any musician are so important. You learn physical coordination, you learn mental discipline, you learn social skills when you play with other people, you learn how to relate to other people, you learn how you fit with other people, right? You learn
Yes.
about time management, like how long you have to spend practicing, you learn about yourself and how long it takes you to process things. And it does make, also different connections in the brain that are really important in all of the fields. I mean, it's amazing what music will do for a human. So even if you don't end up going into music, I think learning music is really important. So I think I eventually came around to that way of thinking. And then of course, if you end up becoming a musician, or at least trying to become a musician, there's a lot of travel involved. You get to meet new
Mhm.
cultures, you get to see new things. And I always kind of think about playing music as time travel, because when you're experiencing new culture in music, it's like you're having this immersive experience, and you get to feel all these different time periods. Like when you're playing Mozart, I like to imagine myself in that time, 300 years ago, 200 years ago. So it's really interesting. Like playing music is such a gift, and we're lucky to be able to do it.
Yes, it's true. Okay, so a reminder to all our viewers and listeners. So please feel free to ask Rita any questions. She'll be very happy to answer you live later during the Q&A session. Okay, let's move on. Why did you decide to leave a major American orchestra to teach full-time at the conservatory?
So the funny thing about that is everybody, when I told them, were shocked, because the Houston Symphony is one of the top 10 American orchestras, and
Yeah.
they have pretty good salary. And I was, it was really a very comfortable life, and I had a lot of free time, and I had a lot of hobbies. And it was the kind of thing I was trained to do that. I worked my whole life. I got into a conservatory, and then the point of training at a conservatory was so I could do this very traditional, music career, which I did.
Mhm.
But we were giving over 200 concerts a year. It's probably between 200 and 300 concerts a year in Houston. And even though in Houston they are still very adventurous about their programming, there still is a certain routine, and you still end up playing, Beethoven's Fifth Symphony 100 times, and Tchaikovsky's
Yeah.
Sixth. And every year there's always some things you play again and again. And I guess I might have gotten a little tired of that. I wanted to explore new composers. I wanted to do some research about things I didn't know, and I wanted the time to do it. Um, I was also getting asked to play more as a soloist, which is kind of a miracle as a viola player, you know.
Yeah.
And for money, people were going to pay me to play as a soloist and chamber musician. So
Mhm.
there's that. And also, like what I talked about earlier with just why music is important, and I was becoming more aware with even the students I had at the time when I was teaching at the university there, how important it was for these students, even if they ended up not going into music, like to get these skills and to learn how to do these things, because it made them better people, and it made them, even whatever field they ended up in. So I wanted to stay in touch with that aspect, and to kind of help the younger generation shape the future. It kind of seems like a big thing. And my students are doing great things right now. Like some of them have jobs in orchestras. So some of them did what I do. Some of them have jobs with quartets. Some
Mhm.
of them have jobs at universities. But the ones who don't go that traditional path have had really interesting careers. One student has a really successful podcast, and she
Mhm.
invites all sorts of people to talk, and like her focus is actually non-traditional styles of playing. And I remember for her recital, her master's recital at school, she did this thing where she compared Bach suite preludes to Swedish fiddle music, and she played a prelude, then she would play the fiddle music on violin and viola, and it all kind of worked together. I mean, it was amazing, the stuff she was doing. So she has this really great podcast. And another one of my students that just graduated this year is starting out, and she started this really interesting blog where she talks every week about how to help music students, kind of what we're doing right now, how to help music students get into music school, or to, learn these skills and what's important to learn. And so I'm really proud of my students, and it's really interesting to see what they're doing, and they're happy. So I think that's the other thing, if making music makes you happy and you're able
Mm.
to find a way to do it and be happy in your life, it's much better to do that, I think, than to not be happy.
Yes, that's amazing. Okay, how do you define yourself as a musician now? And what types of concert do you give?
Well, before the pandemic, I mean, it in America, we're kind of coming out of it a little bit because, there's a lot of vaccinating, and
Mm-hmm.
so luckily things are slowly coming back to normal. But this year, and this past year and a half, I think has been hard for everybody. But before the
Yeah.
pandemic, I did a lot of solo playing, which is amazing. Either solo viola or solo with my duo. I play in a duo with my husband, who's the professor of violin at the school. He was in some of the videos.
Mm.
He also plays in the
Uh,
quartet, so I work with him a lot. So sometimes we play duo solos like Mozart, Britten. There's Arthur Benjamin. There are actually a lot of solos for duo with orchestra. We have a quartet. I started this great project, which I'm really interested in because, like I said, I love music because it kind of recreates a different era. And
mm.
sometimes to do that, I like to think about the art and the history of the time of whatever composer I'm playing. And so somehow we were playing the music of a composer named Ernst Toch, who was a actually Viennese composer that had to escape the Nazis during World War II
Mm,
and
yeah.
moved to America. And a lot of Viennese and Germanic composers did that. If they were Jewish, they came to America and they found work in the film industry in Hollywood. And so, Korngold,
Yeah.
Toch, Steiner, we have so much of our early film music are from these composers. And so we were
Mm.
playing a duo by this guy, Ernst Toch, and our agent was like, "Well, how can you promote this? Like, what kind of concerts can you set up?" And I thought, you know what? He wrote a lot of film music. So I started looking at silent film. And then I got this crazy idea, to put together duo music with silent film, but in a different sort of way. Because what people do when they play silent film is they usually just kind of they create a score, they compose a score, and
Mm-hmm.
they play along with it. And it sometimes it has something to do with the music, but it's not really, reactive. So what I decided to do was kind of figure out what kind of music I wanted to play. It was always going to be music of the right period of the film. And then we play it live with the film and we kind of react to it. So we're playing chamber music with film. We're reacting to the
Mm.
scene. So it's a little bit different every time, and the music is relevant. So we do a lot of those. That was a hugely popular concert for our duo before the pandemic. That's kind of fun. I can
Mm.
show you one if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. Yes,
Is
of
that
course.
okay? We're actually doing one on Wednesday. But here, this is called The Violin Maker of Cremona. And this was originally an opera by Hubai. And
Mm-hmm.
the very famous Hollywood director D.W. Griffith made it into a film. Now, of course, it was a silent film, so there was no music. So
Mm.
they would just have a pianist play random music at the time. But I found the overture to the opera. So this is what you hear at the beginning. So it's that kind of stuff, I mean, it's really fun. It's fun to do. We're doing it live, but we're streaming it on Wednesday, so we've been working on that. But that's
Ah.
like, so again, I like doing these multimedia sort of projects. I've also written an excerpt book, orchestra excerpt book. It's
Mhm.
basically this there's a certain list in America that most orchestras use when they're having auditions.
Yeah.
So in this book, I took those pieces and I made them into etudes, kind of
Mm.
addressing the problems that I've always heard when people come to audition, for an orchestra that I hear when I'm sitting
Mhm.
on a panel. So I did that, and I do a lot of arranging of music for viola and a violin duo.
Wow.
So yeah.
Okay, I'm curious about the silent film. So why did you choose that specific silent film, like rather than like the others? And what is it like so special about it?
Well, with this film, it was fun because um, because it was an opera, so there was actually an overture, which you heard actually that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I only use the overture in the beginning and then I put all sorts of different music to it. But I guess I picked the film. I tend to like shorter films. So when
Mm.
we do the program, we do like maybe 3 or 4 shorter films, like 15-minute films in
Oh.
a row. And I don't know, it's fun. I pick them, I guess. Well, one thing you have to do is I pick public domain, right? So some films aren't
Mhm.
released and I can't actually show them. So it has to be a certain age. But
Oh
it's really
yeah.
interesting to see the acting. It's crazy like how good they were without having to speak at all, in their
Yeah.
faces and everything like that. I mean, it was just amazing. And so when we add music to it, I always look for a way to make the music really appropriate and to have the moments in the music match what happens in the scene. And there's a moment in The Violin Maker in that film I showed the beginning right now.
Mm-hmm.
There's a moment where he takes a violin. This is really painful for everybody who's a string player. He takes a violin and he smashes it on his knee. So at that point in the music, we go crunch, with our instrument. So it's fun. It's really fun. I guess, yeah, it's a great question. How do you pick the film? Sometimes I have the music first. So sometimes we're playing a piece of music and I might think to myself, oh, this is really interesting music and it would go really well for this kind of film. And I begin looking at all these silent films to see if there's something that would match. But sometimes I look at what I want to see on a silent film. I look for the actors I like to watch and
Mm-hmm.
I just pick the film and then I try and make the music, arrange it. Sometimes the presenter will ask me, like in Australia, they wanted to know if we could do a whole program on Shakespeare. So there are a lot of silent films that are Shakespeare topics.
Mm.
So, so there's also that. So then I did it that way. So I looked for the film first and then I arranged the music.
I see. So
Yeah.
during the film, right? Like if it, like you watch the film, and like how do you need to like synchronize like with the film?
Yeah, I mean, we rehearse a lot. I mean, we're playing live, right? So
Yeah.
so what happens is we are standing there watching, like if the screen is in front of us and we stand kind of to the side, but we're watching the screen along with the audience and we have it exactly like we know our tempos
Mm-hmm.
and we just do it. We don't use earphones at all. Like we don't do what you would do now with technology, right? We have
Yes.
earphones.
Yeah.
If you play for a movie studio, you have to have the click track, right? Like a metronome. But we don't do that because they didn't do that back then. This is like 1909 through 1920, right? They didn't do that. They didn't have that
Yeah.
technology. So we just do it with our eyes and we try and match everything. And sometimes it's a little different. So we have to speed up, we slow down. Yeah, it's all
Wow.
visual. Yeah, it's fun. It's really fun. It's a little stressful, but it's fun.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, so what kinds of project do you start doing during the pandemic?
So you can imagine if I'm already before the pandemic doing stuff with film that I
Yeah.
during the pandemic, right? I was going to go full crazy like with all the different kinds of media.
Yeah.
And, just like you, we were in lockdown.
Mm.
So what could we do? Well, teaching is probably the easiest thing you can do on Zoom,
Mm.
right? We
Yes.
all have been doing that, and all of you have been either teaching or giving lessons or getting
Hmm.
lessons. But I had to teach, but the concerts that I had, some of them got canceled, but some of them said, "Hey, can we do them online? Can you record?" So we did a lot of recording. Like I said, all the pieces you saw in the first 5 minutes of this presentation were
Yeah.
recorded since June, in my house. We did have a wonderful recording engineer named Brad Sales, who I know in Houston. He goes in through Zoom and remotely controls my computer. So he runs the recording session that way. So just like in the recording studio where you have the recording engineer in a booth in a separate room, he's on my computer in the room with us. So that's good. So we're able to have a professional do the sound, which is actually a big relief. But yeah, with all the concerts I was supposed to give, some of them said, can you do this chamber music remotely? Now there was this one festival in London called Spitalfields Festival, and they asked that, and the pianist, it was supposed to be just us, the duo and pianist. The pianist lives in London, and of course no one's traveling and we can't do it.
Yeah.
So the question is, how do you do that? So there are these apps, I'm sure some of your viewers know them, but the ones we ended up using were Acapella and BandLab. Yeah, so we did basically, video layering and collaboration using those two apps. And I can also share that if you like.
Yes, of course.
Okay. So actually, what I'm going to show you is I'm going to show you the screen, like my movie screen, which I spend every single day with my video editing. So this is the editing program I use, Final Cut Pro. And this piece is kind of crazy. So this piece was written for this festival. It was all women composers, and she's actually part Korean, and she wrote this piece based on mukbang, which is, I guess, a kind of, you know what it is?
Yeah.
I did it. I had to look it up. Okay, so I'm going to play this for you. Hold on. Here it is. Just the beginning.
I'm very curious about the composition. Like, what was it about? What's behind this whole composition thing?
Sorry, I couldn't find the screen. Okay. I had too many screens open. Right? I mean, so she wrote this piece. She gave us the soundtrack with all these mukbang ASMR sounds.
Yeah.
And it wasn't originally, this concert was supposed to be live. I mean, that's the amazing thing, right? So all these pieces were supposed to be just live, like a normal concert. But once we realized we had to do it remotely, I thought, well, why don't I actually do visual things of these crunching sounds, right? So we had this soundtrack and it was like crunching. Okay, that sounds like a crunching apple. So I told the pianist, okay, you have to eat an apple. Yeah. So, and the piano, I don't know if you heard, it sounded a little funny. It was a prepared piano. Yeah, there was things in the strings. That was a prepared piano sound. So, I mean, so those kinds of, like, they loved that in Britain. I mean, they went nuts. I got some good reviews in the press over there. So, and all this video editing I did myself. I mean, the sound I used my engineer, but the video editing I did myself. And it was really fun to put all that together. So those kinds of projects I'd done over the summer. And then once school started again in November, I got asked to train the teachers to train my colleagues on how to do chamber music and how to teach online and how to run ensembles online. So I spent a lot of time doing that. I did another festival for students, all chamber music, all online, where they use those two apps to kind of put their pieces together, and everybody played a
Yeah.
whole piece after 2 weeks. It was amazing, and we had a film concert and everything. I mean, every single person, and groups, quartets. And I also I just finished this huge 5-day festival at school, that I commissioned 40 composers to write new pieces on what did the pandemic mean to you. So we had 40 new pieces, and we kind of mixed them with existing pieces. So we had about 59 pieces. It was 5-day long festival, and we had master classes, and we also had discussions, panel discussions on composers, and actually in America right now, you probably know there's some issues on race relations, racial tension. We had discussions on that, and it was really interesting, a really interesting festival. So those kinds of things. I kind of went nuts with this, with all the technology. It's a lot of work, but I think it's very effective. And it is a way that, we can show our music in a pandemic.
Yeah. Okay. How will that change as we return to normal life, like after all these? And yeah.
So the amazing thing is, I think some of it should change and some of it won't change and should not change. I mean, look, right now we're talking. I mean, I never would have even thought about doing, interviews across the world before, or doing, master classes I've done in Mexico, also in Taiwan during the pandemic. It's crazy. Like, I never even thought about doing that before. Before I was like, oh no, everything must be live. It has to be live. So I think it's important because this way, the world community becomes very small and we're able to share our ideas very easily now. So that part is really good. I think what's also really good is if students begin to learn these technologies. I think there's a certain basic level of technology knowledge that every musician should have, like how to put together a film very simply, how to do a simple recording. If they're able to do that, then you're able to get your music out there. You can put it on YouTube, you can put it on the Chinese version of that. I don't know how you call that, but there are all sorts of places you can put your music now that more people can see it. And there are so many different ways to make money being a musician now. And I think live concerts are still amazing. And I actually, I didn't play a live concert for, I think, 13 months. And I just played one in May, and, I'm doing another one. It's slowly coming back over here, but even just being at it, it was such an amazing experience to be back in the same room with other musicians. But that doesn't mean that, we can't still do this. And I think it's important to still do this. One thing that I learned that was really interesting was recording with my quartet. The Beethoven in the opening film that you showed, the quartet got together. We had to quarantine, and then we socially distanced, right, for for our rehearsals. And then gradually we got closer and closer until finally everybody tested negative and we could take the mask off. And it was a really big deal, but it was so much effort. But before that, because we had to record 18 pieces in 3 days.
18.
Right? 18 pieces in 3 days.
Crazy.
It was crazy. So the way we did it, though, we rehearsed via a cappella. We rehearsed using the technology. By like a month before, we would send, even just one time, we'd send, okay, here's, 20 bars from this piece. Now you put your part on top of that. And we got to learn each other's parts that way. And I think actually learning music that way is really helpful. And my students have started to do it in school. We really encouraged them to do it this year. And it was amazing how fast they were able to put things together once they did get together in person, even with masks on and distanced, So I think these kind of skills, these few things that we've been doing during the pandemic, it shouldn't be only that, but I think it should be some of that going forward, because I think it's really important, and I think it'll be a great way for you to be able to be in touch with the entire world.
Yeah, I see. Yes. Okay, so as you may have heard, the Jesselton Philharmonic Orchestra has involved itself in a variety of activities. So on behalf of JPO, we would like to ask your views on the JPO and its activities. Additionally, how would you suggest the JPO and its members further improve itself?
So I hear you do a lot of outreach, and I think that is really important because, like I said, I think the biggest thing right now, the biggest conversation we're having, at least in the US right now, is about access to young musicians
Yeah.
in underdeserved communities, right? So communities that don't have the kind of access. And of course, I'm talking about technology, and some communities don't have that. So that's okay. But I think what you do, if you can send people out into the community, even just small groups, and train young kids to play music, like I said, it's so important to mental development and emotional development. And for me, it really was a little bit of a lifesaver, like learning music. I didn't have the easiest childhood, and it kind of it put me into this world where I was able to do things and have these experiences and have this culture of the whole world instead of just my little, narrow box that maybe wasn't going to be so good as a child. So what you're doing with the outreach is really important. I think I was telling my friend in Atlanta who was running a youth orchestra, he asked, well, what can we do? Because it was at the start of the pandemic, and he was asking me, well, how do you do this chamber music and how do you do this? And I was telling him that, and I said, but the most important thing, if there's any way you can get some money for the city or some corporation to give internet access to the kids to help pay for some of the technology so that they can have lessons, even just old computers, old phones, just so they're, and then internet, right? And it's different in Asia than it is in America. And like in Asia, I think it's easier to get internet. In America, it's still hard, very hard in a lot of towns. But to get that out there into the communities is really important. So then the world opens up for these kids. So outreach in that way also is important. I would encourage you, your donors, to kind of explore that, because it will make such a huge difference to kids. And I don't know if are you doing like groups at all? You probably are, right?
Yes, we are doing groups.
Yeah. I think that's great. I love that. And I love that, that even during a pandemic, when kids aren't allowed to be face to face, that they can still have this outlet and play for each other and then hear a product put together. So I think that's great too.
I see. Yeah. Okay. So I actually have a question. So since during pandemic, right? Since we're all under like lockdown, this kind of situation, like do you have any other projects, like new projects, or maybe something innovative coming out? Or I
think more of the same kind of thing. Like I said, we're doing a silent film on Wednesday. I'm building another website. There are all sorts of things I'm doing. I'm actually arranging, I got a grant to arrange and develop more music for viola by composers of color, because I think in classical standard conservatory training, you learn a lot about all the Germanic composers, the dead white guys, right? And it's important. I mean, that stuff is very important. It's our foundation as musicians, as classical musicians. But what's also important is knowing all the styles of music and knowing your country's composers. And so I really, actually, that was another thing I encourage you to do, is to support young composers to make music for your students, or to support the students in making music for themselves in any way they can. It doesn't, it doesn't have to be the traditional way, because that is a great way to express yourself. So what I'm doing with my grant is I'm finding all this lost music from composers of color and composers that people don't play. And I put it into a database, and I'm arranging some of it for viola, because a lot of it isn't for viola. The viola, no one knows about the viola, right? So, but so that way that violas can have, foundational studies and foundational solos that are written by composers that aren't Mozart and Beethoven and Bach, but
Mhm.
still very useful in terms of learning technique and learning music and learning how to do
Yeah.
different styles.
Okay, there are some questions here. So, hi, may I know in between playing solo chamber music orchestra and teaching, which is your favorite and why?
Yeah. You know what? My favorite is whatever I'm doing at the moment.
Uh,
Unless I'm doing it too much, and then it becomes really not my favorite.
oh.
Okay, let's see. I guess, overall, I think my favorite honestly has always been chamber music because it's a smaller, group. It's not as anonymous. You're more
Mhm.
responsible for your own part, so you can be like a soloist, but it's not as exposed as being a
Yeah.
soloist, right? So chamber music, and I love the social aspect of it. Like I've always enjoyed playing in chamber groups. And so, and it is kind of what I do for a living now. So that is maybe my most favorite thing to do. But
Yeah.
I don't, it's not just about playing concerts. Like I've said, it's about kind of having the experience, giving the audience the experience of the entire culture. So if I'm doing a film concert, they're getting the experience of the music plus the video. Sometimes I'll do concerts where we have like pictures projected along with the music.
Mm,
So it's always about like the immersive experience for me.
I see. Okay, another question. So, hi, Professor. What were you teaching in the university, the viola? And do you teach other subjects?
At the university, I teach viola. I
Mhm.
also teach chamber music. Actually, I run the chamber music program
Mhm.
and I teach chamber music. And, the interesting thing about my university is I started this degree of chamber music for undergraduates, which there isn't one
Mm.
in America except for our school now. So that's a fun degree because you play a lot of chamber music, you get
Yeah.
a degree in chamber music, you also get to learn other skills because our school has a lot of different kinds of topics, so different majors. So we have a recording studio, so in the chamber music degree you have to take a recording class. You have a
Mhm.
class on how to do to business of music, which is like how to manage your career, like how to negotiate a contract, how
Ah.
to write a resume, how to write a cover letter, how to get concerts basically.
Mm.
Of course, history of chamber music and performance practice and things like that. So I teach some of those classes, like I teach the history of chamber music class from 1800 to the present. I also teach some performance practice classes. And, even though I love chamber music, I spent 20 years of my life playing in orchestras. So I also teach the viola orchestra rep class,
Oh,
orchestra repertoire class. Yeah.
I see.
So I teach both sides at the university.
Mm. Okay, so is it chamber music only, or for like the string group, or is it? Do you teach like all kinds of chamber, even ensembles also?
I do, yeah.
I
Yeah.
see.
Not just string, yeah. I was the director of a very special chamber ensemble called 2020, which doesn't exist anymore at our school, but
Uh,
it was all the best players in the school, and so it was all the instruments. And so I'd have
mm.
to kind of make concerts out of, weird combinations of instruments, like, viola and
Yeah.
percussion and trombone. So and we coach all of that. Yeah. So,
Mm.
yeah.
Okay, the next question. Would you say there are a lot more opportunities and demand for violists than the violinists?
Yes, that has always been true. It's a little bit less true now, but I still think I'm always looking for violists. Right? In my chamber music festival for students, for high school students that I run, that starts in July. Yeah, we have very few violists.
Mm.
So I'm always looking for violists. And there's always more money, for scholarship for violists. But I'm not saying,
Oh.
I'm not saying everybody should play the viola. I'm just saying there are more opportunities. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Are you a violist?
No, I'm a violinist.
Okay. It's okay. I won't hold it against you.
Okay, so we have come to the end of our broadcast. So, on behalf of JPO, we would like to thank you for dedicating your time and energy into this interview despite the pandemic that is happening right now. We would also like to thank everyone who has attended and supported this program. You guys have been great. I hope you guys got the answers you wanted. So this broadcast will be on every Wednesday and Sunday night at the same time until further notice. Now I will end with prayer. Please pray in whatever faith you believe in for the COVID-19. Dear Lord, thank you for giving us the opportunity to come together, continue running this program at a moment like this. I want to pray for the nurse and doctors from around the world who has been constantly treating patients with COVID-19, and I hope people who diagnosed with COVID-19 will get better soon. Lastly, I pray for our safety and health, and may the future there be peace within. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Okay, thank you everyone, and thank you Rita. We're very honored to have you as our guest speaker.
Thank you for having me. It's been fun.
Thank you.